Welcome back. I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining me for another explainer. So today, we are unpacking this honestly really fascinating challenge in the world of corporate sustainability reporting. We're going to look closely at how massive integrated paper companies actually measure their environmental impact. And we're drawing this directly from the SASB sustainability accounting standards. Now, it sounds straightforward, right? But as you'll see, it is absolutely anything but.
Because this is the fundamental question we're trying to answer today. Where exactly does the forest end and the factory begin? I mean, when a single company owns the land, chops down the trees, and then chemically processes that wood into paper, how do we evaluate them? How do investors and analysts avoid double counting a company's green initiatives, or, on the flip side, missing their industrial pollution when their business spans both logging and manufacturing?
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a clear roadmap for the explainer today. First up, we'll look at the integrated firm's dilemma. Then, we'll see exactly how the standard draws the reporting boundary. After that, we'll step inside pulp and paper, analyze the fiber supply chain, and finally, wrap it all up by looking at why these boundaries matter. Let's get right to it. Section 1, the integrated firm's dilemma. Integrated operations. So to really understand the accounting rules, we first have to understand the physical reality. And the reality is, modern integrated paper companies operate on an almost unimaginably massive scale. Just think about the visceral contrast here for a second. On one side of the business, you've got these sprawling, quiet timber tracts. It's all fresh pine, soil, forest management. But then, on the exact opposite side of that same company's ledger, you have heavy industrial mills. These are facilities defined by intense thermal processing, heavy chemical usage, and just massive energy consumption. So, imagine you're a regulator or an investor trying to assess this company's environmental footprint. If the company blurs the lines, they could, theoretically, use the carbon absorption of their vast forests to just mask the heavy emissions of their industrial factories. It's kind of like grading a student on their math homework, but giving them extra credit for recess, right? It just creates total confusion in the market. You absolutely need a system that forces clarity.
Section 2, drawing the reporting boundary, drawing the line.
And this is exactly how the SASB standard solves that dilemma. The standard explicitly divides the company into two completely separate reporting buckets. It's like a split screen. On the left side, we have the Forestry Management Standard, or RRFM. That covers all the logging, the replanting, the land management. But on the right side, we have the Pulp and Paper Products Standard, RRP. And that is strictly the chemical and thermal processing at the mill. Two different worlds, governed by two entirely different sets of rules. The SASB guidelines are incredibly strict about this, too. Right in the industry description, it lays down the law. It explicitly states that even if an integrated entity owns timber tracts, any sustainability issues from managing those forests are punted right over to the Forestry Management Industry Standard. They are completely 100% excluded from the pulp and paper metrics. So it's a hard line in the sand. Which means, for the rest of this explainer, we are stepping firmly across that boundary. We're leaving the forest behind, we are ignoring the land management side of things entirely, and we're going to focus exclusively on the intense industrial reality of the mill under the RRP standard. Section 3. Inside pulp and paper. Industrial metrics. Now, once you cross that boundary into the factory, the data density gets really intense. Just look at the sheer volume of specific industrial measurements required here. Companies have to report their gross global Scope 1 emissions. They have to detail their air quality impacts, specifically tracking nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, hazardous air pollutants, the whole shebang. And they must track thousands of cubic meters of water withdrawn and consumed, specifically pinpointing their operations in regions with high baseline water stress. To translate all that technical jargon into physical reality for a second, these emissions are coming from massive, heavy machinery. We are talking about cogeneration fuel boilers operating at just extreme temperatures, high-pressure chambers for treating pulp, vats for chemical recovery, massive stationary and mobile process engines. Make no mistake, this is a highly intensive manufacturing environment. And when tracking the greenhouse gas emissions from all that machinery, this right here is the magic number, 7. The standard requires companies to consolidate and report their emissions of the 7 distinct greenhouse gases covered under the Kyoto Protocol. That's everything from your standard carbon dioxide and methane, all the way to sulfur hexafluoride and nitrogen trifluoride. Say that 5 times fast, right? And it all has to be calculated in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, because these mills require so much power, energy management is a huge part of the disclosure. Many mills actually burn self-generated biomass for energy. And while this carbon-neutral biomass definitely reduces the need to purchase fossil fuels, it carries its own distinct risks. Burning biomass can heavily impact local air quality, and it carries regulatory risks around biogenic carbon dioxide. So the standard requires companies to disclose exactly what percentage of their energy comes from the grid, from fossil fuels, and from biomass, so investors can accurately weigh those trade-offs.
Section 4. The fiber supply chain. Sourcing raw materials.
So if the forest and the factory are totally separated in reporting, how do they actually connect? Well, the supply chain is that critical bridge. Remember, because the firm cannot claim its own sustainable forest management under this specific pulp and paper standard, the mill is treated as a buyer. It must strictly track and report exactly how and where it procures its raw wood fiber, treating its very own forests just like any other third-party supplier.
To prove that the virgin fiber entering the mill was sustainably harvested, legally compliant, and protective of biodiversity, companies have to rely on rigorous third-party certifications. The standard specifically names the heavy hitters here, like the Forest Stewardship Council, the Sustainable Forest Initiative, the PEFC, and the American Tree Farm System.
Now, what's really fascinating about this breakdown is how the standard forces absolute transparency. Companies can't just wave their hands and say they use sustainable wood. No way. They have to provide a percentage breakdown by weight. They must disclose exactly what percentage of their fiber comes from third-party certified forest lands, what percentage meets other sourcing standards, and what percentage is actually recycled and recovered fiber.
And speaking of recycled fiber, the standard asks companies to explain how they weigh the environmental life cycle trade-offs. Sure, using recycled fiber is great because it reduces deforestation and keeps paper out of landfills. But as the standard points out, collecting, transporting, and chemically reprocessing that waste, well, it can actually increase energy consumption and generate more air emissions than just using virgin fiber. It's a really delicate balancing act that companies are forced to publicly explain.
Section 5. Why these boundaries matter. The value of the split. So, why go through all the trouble of splitting the company in half on paper? Well, this boundary is exactly what you, as an informed learner or investor, need to look for. It prevents companies from double counting their carbon sinks. It forces them to expose the true regulatory compliance costs of running a heavy industrial mill. It totally isolates their exposure to water scarcity in stressed regions. And ultimately, it ensures they are fully transparent about their supply chain. And because these SASB rules are now overseen by the International Sustainability Standards Board, this boundary applies globally. It ensures that whether a massive pulp mill is operating in the forests of Canada or in a highly water-stressed region of India, the financial risks tied to its environmental footprint are measured consistently and fairly. So I'll leave you with this final thought. In a world where environmental claims are just everywhere, the structure of the data matters just as much as the data itself. If an integrated firm draws the boundary incorrectly and mixes the forest with the factory, are we really measuring sustainability? Or are we just looking at creative accounting? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you next time.